It is the oldest surviving steel erection company in the United States. Like America itself, it is a company that continues to expand and redefine itself. Ours is the story not of one family, but rather an extended family, reaching back across a century. A family that continues to give. A family that believes in continuity.
Probably some 20-some-odd years I've been with Ben Hur.
I've worked for Ben Hur for 27 years.
Well, off and on for 30 years. Probably about 35 years.
I started with Ben Hur right at 41 years ago.
So it is that today we tell the story of a different Ben Hur with a different kind of chariot.
They built some of the largest buildings here in St. Louis.
Probably too many to even remember.
But as Ben Hur observes its centennial and renews its commitment to the future, now is the time to remember.
We've always reinvested in the company. We've tried to keep money in the company. The owners didn't just always take everything out every chance they got, and that goes back to my grandfather, W.N.
My dad was born on a farm in Virginia. He left the farm when he was young and went with one of his brothers to work in a coal mine in West Virginia. And during that time, he went to work for a friend of his father's who was a railroad section gang laying railroad track. And then when his brother got laid off, well, they went home to Virginia, where a company was just beginning to build a bridge across what was known in those days as Blackwater River. You could almost hit it with a rock from his house. And he went to work on that bridge and liked the work, and they liked him, and he stayed with them. Then he worked as an iron worker. He worked mostly in the South and the Southeast. He later went to work for another man, a steel erector out of Pittsburgh, and was sent into St. Louis as the superintendent on the public library at 13th and Locust Streets. When he came to St. Louis was in a depression, and the union here wasn't very happy about an outside person coming to St. Louis to run what was probably the largest job going on at that time. And literally once a week, they chose among themselves one guy to go down there and pick a fight with my dad. And he literally beat every one of them up. His employer was having some cash flow problems and asked Dad if he could advance him enough money to meet the payroll on the jobs for a couple or 3 weeks. And each time he did, why, his employer would give him a promissory note for the money.
When the employer could not reimburse his notes, the equipment from the public library job was auctioned on the courthouse steps.
And Dad ended up with that equipment in lieu of his cash that he had advanced, and he was in business for himself. He and my mother were married about that same time, and my mother forced my dad to take her to see the stage play of Ben Hur at the Old American Theater in St. Louis, and Dad was very impressed with the character of this guy, Ben Hur, and so he named the company after that.
The new company built all over the Midwest. By today's standards, the equipment was primitive, yet the imagination was unbounded.
Dad loved to talk about putting the statue on top of the Capitol building in Jefferson City. I think he took each one of my siblings down there and personally showed us each one where he anchored the trolley cable to a tree and hoisted the statue in two pieces. It was split around the waistline and put it up there in two pieces using a mule or a team of mules to pull it up a cableway.
As St. Louis was being built, Ben Hur built it. Movie theaters, the Ambassador, Lowe's State, the Missouri, and the St. Louis, which is now Powell Hall.
Mr. Schindler went to work for Dad in December of 1924, 2 months before I was born. He was an engineer. He was a graduate of Purdue University, one of the most decent people I've ever known in my life. He stayed there and ultimately became president of the company.
The stock market crash in 1929 ushered in the greatest economic depression in the nation's history.
The Depression was a lean time for all America. As the work vanished, many contractors were forced to lay off their employees.
The older people in Ben Hur, who were, of course, the leaders of the company, all got together and they talked among themselves about what could they do to keep these young people without having to lay them off. And so they all decided what's the least amount of money that they could live off of. Mr. Schindler and my dad went without salary. They didn't have any pay at all until after the Depression was basically over. But because of that, they never laid off any of their people during the Depression.
And yet some of Ben Hur's most enduring structures were built during the Depression, not the least of which was the iconic Park Plaza Hotel.
There were several stories about the Park Plaza. One was that when it was going on, he had broken his leg. And he had moved into this house that I grew up in that had an attic. It was a second attic above a second floor, and it had a high window. And he could look out that window with a pair of binoculars and watch what was going on the Park Plaza. And my mother I remember her telling me she could hear him yelling up there like he was standing next to the people about what they should be doing. He was up there on a stool with his broken leg trying to run that job.